Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahin and I'm here with my co-hosts, Sheikh Amir, Saeed, and Sim. And today in studio we welcome a very special guest, Mawlana Bilal Ansari. Mawlana Bilal, welcome to the show.
Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So Mawlana Bilal started, he's from the Chicagoland area, got his undergraduate degree. Did you finish from UIUC?
No, I didn't finish from there. I finished from National Louis University.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the bio I was about to read this bio off, and it was like a 3-page essay with a bunch of fancy terms like Shaykh al-Hadith and ijāzahs and isnads and stuff like that. You know that a lot of folks maybe will be over their heads, but maybe we'll have to link it in the show notes. But I'm not gonna get into that. But Mawlana Bilal is someone that he may not remember me, but I always remember he used to have the cleanest jubbas.
He does.
In 2008, I was at a Darul Hikmah retreat. I'm not a Chicago native. I was at a retreat. It was at Des Plaines Masjid.
Okay.
It was the Memorial Day weekend, I think it was. It's the first time I ever heard of Mufti Ḥusayn Kamani, too. He was like 19 years old. He hadn't even got married yet. He was getting married that week. Right? I don't know if you remember that. I don't know if that was but that retreat like blew my mind. Like, I was like, it was a good program. Y'all had me crying and stuff, which is really hard to do because I got a really like hard heart.
Yeah. Mission accomplished, mashallah.
You know, I was like, dang, this is for real. And I was like, I'm a spiritual high after.
Mashallah.
But then the NBA final started, so I got distracted again.
Welcome to Mahin's world, brother. Here we go. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to kind of get your whole take. Growing up in Chicago, you started off in computer engineering and have a background of coding and all that, and then when did this love for studying the deen come into play for you, or is this something that's always been there? And why the segue?
Oh man, subhanallah, I think there's always multiple ways of looking at your own biography, right? I think at some point you look at it as like a singular event that changes your direction, but then the older you get, the more you realize the influences of your parents, your early education, friends. So I think, from probably a pretty early age, I was religiously inclined, but I didn't have this mindset to pursue higher Islamic learning. And then in high school, I started getting involved in dawah work. And then right before college, I spent 40 days in Jama'at al-Tabligh in England. And then the 2 years of college, when I was doing pre-med also and engineering, which was really tough. And I was asking some questions about like what I wanted to do with my life. And I was getting very excited about dawah work. And this was in Urbana-Champaign. And I actually used to spend a lot of my time doing dawah work. But I wasn't really satisfied with like where I was in terms of Islamic knowledge and understanding just like, how to deal with today's generation, and I felt horribly ill-equipped in terms of Quran and Hadith. So I think there was a general dissatisfaction that led me to try to explore all the options. And in Chicago at that time, there weren't a lot of opportunities for studying. So I think it was in 2000 or 1999, I met a scholar who was studying in Pakistan. He was actually still at that time a student of knowledge, and he's now an imam in Minnesota, Mawlana Farfarāz Ahmad. And he was just like an extraordinary figure. He was like a dynamic, enthusiastic, I won't say a firebrand, but he was a very powerful speaker. He was a very passionate person. Anyone who knows him, Mawlana Farfarāz, he's a very, very passionate person. The guy who keeps it real. And he first introduced me to the idea of actually going abroad and studying. At that time, I hadn't really thought of the idea. And so that's where kind of then like everything started to click. It's a lot of these influences are, from your parents, your mother. They teach you, how to conduct yourself in life and, to emphasize Islam, to prioritize Islam. But really, sometimes it's like at some point, everything just comes together. It's not like some dream you saw at nighttime or some some sign you see in the clouds that you go and study. It's kind of, it all leads to some point. But I became very, I think, anxious about studying sophomore year of college. So I kind of made the radical step to kind of just withdraw from college at that point, pursue my Islamic studies, because I knew that if I finished my education, I finished my bachelor's at that point, I probably wasn't likely to pursue it seriously. And then when I came back, I actually shifted directions towards the applied behavioral sciences. So I went from pre-med, pre-engineering or engineering towards applied behavioral sciences,
Sure.
which is quite different.
Now, you grew up in Chicago, right?
I grew up in the western suburbs,
Yes.
southwest suburbs.
So-
One of the original IFS families.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, here's
When I used to watch him roaming the halls eating Doritos.
yeah, as an
He used to
outsider,
love Doritos when he was a little kid.
I don't remember that.
as an outsider, when I see people like Mawlana Bilal or Mufti Azimuddin to a little less extent, because he's from Kankakee, he's from the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Right.
He's from Bears training camp, Bourbonnais, Illinois.
It's like south there, like 20 miles south.
Yeah.
But I, as an outsider, being from Ohio, when I see people in Chicago or people like Sheikh Ḥusayn Aḥmad, etc., and I see you guys, I think it's more of I've always attributed it. Maybe it's an excuse. I'm like, well, these guys are in Chicago Sharif. Like, you guys are in your own little bubble. Like, there are places probably in the Muslim world that don't have the kind of atmosphere for spiritual and Islamic development that Chicago has. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, as Sheikh Amir, he's been to Mauritania and like India. I mean, subhanAllah, yeah, I think compared to maybe other cities in Chicago is extraordinary, but I mean, there's nothing like outside of, the Muslim
Maybe
world.
if you go to some...
I was talking about like Dhaka.
Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Well, that's one of the interesting things is that if you go to the Muslim world, there are a lot of times when I would go to Pakistan as a visitor, I didn't see much of like the real Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
I was going to the tourist areas and to the museums and to like typically where tourists go. But then if you go to those those very special places where the special people exist, like the reason why like Pakistan still exists on the face of this earth and Allah subhanahu hasn't sent an adhab upon it because of like all the corruption and everything, like you see that like what treasures exist in certain parts of the Muslim world, then you recognize that, wow, we have nothing like that here.
Yeah, I think the reason why it seems like it's the contrast, it's a minority of Muslims and you see everything else around you and all of a sudden you enter into this area where there's Muslims or a masjid and you're like, wow, this is amazing. How can this exist in America, right? Like
a lot of like, I want to just be upfront with you. Like, a lot of people see Mashaykh like yourself and, Mufti Azim, for example. Like, Mufti Azim, I'll see him at the airport. He's got like a turban on with a white thobe. Sheikh Hamza, I don't think Maqbul does not own any like, I think I asked him, he doesn't own like shirts and pants. You know what I mean? And so I'm like, in other parts of the country, there's this whole thing about like, okay, well, we're scholars, but I might wear like a suit jacket and a dress shirt or slacks, right? And like a lot of people are dismissive of it. They're like, well, these guys are out of touch. You get what I'm saying? I'm sure you've heard that. And they're like, and again, it comes back to like Chicago's a bubble. They're not in tune with what's the reality on the ground. You get what I'm saying?
I kind of get what you're saying. I mean, the idea that some Muslims in Chicago are much more willing to identify outwardly as Muslims is, I think, something significant as a development within the Muslim community. I mean, I remember in high school, when I was in high school, my older sister, I think, was like the first or second female to wear a hijab in high school, and it was very difficult at that time. I remember that there was a time where there was some bully or some individual who was walking the halls and like teasing her and pulled her hijab off, and she came home very distraught. And I remember that I was a freshman, and some guy came up to me and said, "Hey, you ever seen that towel head that walks around school?" And I've never heard that word towel head before, so I didn't get it. And then I'm like, click. I'm like, wait, he's talking about hijab. That's my sister. So I was very upset about that. But I remember that was like very odd, for people to see in school. So they didn't know what to say, what to call it. And now it's very common. I mean, that same high school, you see dozens of girls wearing hijab. And I think an interesting personal experience that I had when I went to England in 1998, I want to say. And I was 17 or 18 years old, and I met a lot of high school age students there. They have like a different system. They're metric, I don't know what exactly the equivalent is, but I met 17-year-olds with like large beards and wearing kufis and like nice custom tailored kurtas that their father had sewn for them. And I'm like, where am I? You know? And it really did have an effect on me, because I felt like, look at these young men. They don't have any hesitation to identify publicly. They go to public parks. They're going to universities. Obviously, this was before 9/11 and all that. But it was very acceptable. And I think I longed for that in Toronto as well. I think I used to see that in Toronto more. But I don't think that that's all of what it means to be also a scholar. That's part of, I think, a cultural battle that's been taking place post-colonialism that I think is very important, right? I think it's like there are people who would say, from a legal perspective, do you need to always identify in that manner?
Yeah.
And the answer would be, no, certainly not. You know, as long as you meet the basic requirements of modest clothing. But then there's this idea that, well, I'm an American, I could dress however I want. You know, I was in like an Urbana one time in the middle of winter, and I saw this guy on campus walking around in the middle of like a snowstorm with shorts, you know, and a t-shirt, and he's got his headphones on, and he's walking around casually, like, you know, this is completely normal. And I remember asking somebody, I'm like, what is that guy thinking? He's like, well, he can dress however he wants. And I was at that time just exploring wearing a turban on campus. And I was wearing a kurta, whatever kurta I had at that time. And I'm like, well, then why should I be afraid of wearing this, right? And I used to have like this, I used to feel a lot of pressure, because it's obviously not very easy to, at that time at least, it wasn't very easy to dress. I mean, even now, I think, if you're wearing a turban, and you don't have to wear a turban. I would just do it because, like, hey, you know, it looks cool, you know?
Yeah.
And I want to be able to assert myself. And I remember one time I had a really, like, I was having a very tough time wearing this Muslim garb, you know, so to speak. And I was leaving my math class, and I remember I saw coming out of the same building this Sikh guy. And he was wearing this large pink turban.
Wow.
And it was like a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that look, and he, you know, I don't know what the color system is, but he was wearing like a kind of a bright pink, and he had no shame. He's like, he had no, you know, sense
fear.
of like, fear that like, this is like odd. What are people going to say? And I'm like, oh, okay, this is a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he can wear with pride a pink turban, and you can wear a black or white or green turban.
Totally. No, man,
So speaking of pink, Sheikh Yasser and his purple kurtas, Yasser Qati, we were driving with him once, and I think the time for Asr was coming to an end. We're like, okay, well, we have to pray. And I said, well, let's just pull over to the side of the road and let's pray. And that blew him away. He's like, what? You guys are you guys sure that's safe? I'm like, no, we do it all the time. That's something normal, at least from me and my friends and the friends they know. It's pretty normal. I don't know about the broader Muslim community, but I've pulled over to the side of the road and just take out my prayer rug from my trunk and just pray. And he's like, no, this, you guys, this is a different climate now. And I'm like, yeah. Trust me, Chicago's a lot more different than what the rest of the world, rest of the country is. But would I let my wife do that? Probably not, because I feel like they're much more prone to someone throwing something out of their car and, you know, hitting them.
Yeah, I wouldn't, depending what area it is, though. Yeah,
exactly. So especially in the city,
you don't want to be on 294 and like on the side of the road praying. That's not safe.
Which I think we've done in the college days before.
I mean,
I don't know if you
could
want to
have
do
pulled
that.
up at the Oasis. That's the nice thing about 294.
Yeah.
But I've got a funny story for you. So a few months ago, and my get up, if you've seen me around, like last night you saw me, I was wearing like a shirt, like a full blown suit, right? But then you might see me elsewhere. It's usually like baseball caps and sneakers. But I also have I like Islamic garb. I like jubbas and turbans and stuff, and like the whole shawl look. Like Habib Omar is like one of the clean. You know, Habib Omar. He's like one of the cleanest looking dudes in the world.
Yeah.
You know. So I was at my friend's wedding. It was like the guy hulud, I think. What do y'all call it in like Indo-Pak culture?
What?
The guy, is that Mehdi? Do you guys call that
Mehdi?
Mehdi?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I went to this thing, right, for my friend a few months ago, right? And so I'm rocking this blue jubba and shawl and turban and everything. And it's time for like Maghrib or Isha, I forget what it was. And like there's like 3 Hufad there. And some random uncle comes to me, he's like, hey, he's motioning me to lead. I'm like, just because I'm dressed like this doesn't mean nothing, man.
That's why I literally stopped dressing like that, because people assume that you're somebody that you're really not, and it just took the fun out of it.
Took the fun out.
Yeah, I don't have that great qiraat that some some people have, and I don't want to lead. I wouldn't mind doing it if I had some great voice that could lead, a salah. But I ended up feeling really uncomfortable, and I'm like, no, I'm not who you think I am.
People start greeting you out of nowhere.
I think I got a nice voice, but my tajweed is just broke.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting thing about many of the mashayikh is that the more knowledge that they would have and possess, the less they would want to show that in their clothing. So you would find like very strange, interesting examples of like the most pious and the most academic figures in India, and they would wear lungis and a simple white shirt. And when they would enter a masjid, you would not be able to recognize that this is like some great sheikh. In fact, the first time I went to Karachi and I met Mufti Muhammad Taqi Uthmani, and I was so excited. I was going to go for Jummah and I was going to meet him, and I'd never seen him before. And I don't know. This was like, early 2000s. So I don't think that it was like there was a picture available of him on the internet, or for some reason I don't remember actually seeing a picture of him. And I remember that actually he walked into the masjid. He was wearing really simple white kurta, simple clothing. He looks like it's just like some uncle at the masjid.
Yeah.
And I saw him, and then I saw him pray, and then he gets up on the minbar and he starts the khutbah, and I'm like, I thought Mufti Taqi Sahib was going to give the khutbah today. And he's not very like, I thought he was going to be 7 foot tall, with a huge turban, and, he's going to have this nice, and he looks like so simple. He had a simple, like the jali topi, the netted kufi, and he had very simple clothing. And that's just how he conducts himself, very simply. And, I know the sentiment where you don't want to have to lead. And actually, I think the more that you're capable of leading, the less you'll want to lead.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying, man. Yeah, sometimes
sure.
It's a little embarrassing.
Mawlana Bilal, when you were growing, when you started your Islamic studies endeavors, what would you say this is like what, late 90s, early 2000s?
Early 2000. I started formal studies in 2000.
So at the time, if you're thinking like on the national scale, the well-known speakers are like Imam Siraj al-Hajj, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Imam Zaid Shak. I don't even know if Imam Zaid was even that big back then, right? Early 2000s?
Yeah, I didn't know of Imam Zaid until after I returned.
Like Dr. Jamal Badawi, but this whole celebrity imam culture wasn't really a huge thing back then, right?
I mean, that's an interesting thing. Celebrity scholarship is an old concept, in Islamic history, because my field of interest and specialization is Hadith. So if you look at a lot of the books on Hadith, the Hadith sciences, there's always a mention of the role in fabrication of like the qassas, the storytellers, and like how storytellers would oftentimes be motivated to fabricate hadith because of the seeking of popularity. And I think it's like an old concept, and it's interesting because I don't think it's going to go away, just because it's just natural for a person who has knowledge to be tempted to use knowledge to attain celebrity. And then it's very common for people not to be attracted to scholarship, like non-exciting scholarship. And that's the interesting thing about, I think, in Darul Qasim, Shaykh Amin always instills on the students that be ready for like knowledge to be boring and difficult. And if it's only exciting, then you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah. Because the fiqh language in the original books of fiqh it's very choppy. It's not, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. It's just legal code, right? But obviously, it's if once you love it, there's a whole different love to it, and there's a whole different reality to it. But there are times where you're just reading a whole bunch of pages of, in a certain type of style, which is not in a flowery style by any means. It's a very logic-based style. And it's not going to be something that you're going to be like, oh man, I have such an iman high right now. Even though there's a different iman high to it if you have a love for fiqh, right?
Yeah.
Those types of books have, if you have a love for it. But the average person is not going to have lots of fun going through that.
But,
right?
People say that the celebrity imam, he or to their defense, they'll say that they weren't seeking that fame. It just happened. There was a vacuum there and their voice filled that vacuum. It wasn't necessarily that, they were at a certain level of celebrity or that they had some type of knowledge that other people didn't have. Absolutely. It was just that they filled a vacuum that was needed in the community, and they don't even seek fame. And I've talked to like Sheikh Yasir Khati, who hates the celebrity imam culture of how people come up to him wanting selfies and things like that. He hates it, despises it. He had to put up a Facebook post saying, please stop doing that. It's something that I'm terribly uncomfortable with, and he got a lot of heat for that too. So I haven't seen people from Chicago, in that celebrity culture. Have you? I mean, have you seen?
I think that's a very important distinction, because I think that celebrity. See, when a person becomes like a popular figure, there are various means to acquire celebrity, right? And so there are people who are seeking it out. And Imam Ghazali in his Ihya al-Ulumuddin, I'm quoting from the abridgment of Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi in his Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. He speaks about this question. He talks about like the virtues of like hiding yourself and avoiding celebrity and avoiding popularity. But then he asked the question that if people say, well, how about the prophets and the awliya? They're the most famous of people. And then his answer is very simple, that if a person isn't seeking it, right, they're in other words, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them well known, then there's no harm in that. Right. But then in general, a person should try to avoid it even when they are receiving that popularity, just because very few people are able to handle it properly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also that distinction is awesome that Imam Ghazali made, because also the prophets, they have their mission is complete change, right? They want to change everything around them. And that change, they've built a step-by-step process of how that change has to come about, right? And I think a lot of times with popularity is you're just, there's just blasts of awesome information, awesome knowledge, awesome gems, but there's not really a follow-through. Okay, this is our next step. This is how we have to change our entire atmosphere.
This is why we don't see you at conferences, or you're not. I mean, are you trying to avoid the whole spotlight?
Well, I mean, look, so I think one of the blessings of
and he doesn't mean that in a weird and condescending way anyway.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because, so I had, alhamdulillah, the opportunity to study in various institutions of learning. And initially I studied in a madrasa that was founded by Mawlana Tariq Jamil, right? And Mawlana Tariq Jamil is like the prototypical celebrity scholar, right? In the sense that if you go to certain places in Pakistan, like I've literally heard stories where they'd have to knock the walls down on the outer boundaries of the masjid because people were sitting on the walls and it was getting dangerous. 30,000 people easily would just fit into
his
into
speaking
a masjid.
style. If you understand Urdu, is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
His speaking style is just captivating. Go ahead. Sorry.
So like when I left that institution, obviously his name became attached to me. There was a certain expectation that he's going to be speaking like Mawlana Tariq Jamil. But the interesting thing is that his own son, Mawlana Yusuf Jamil, he looks very similar. But Mawlana Tariq Jamil Sahib once said to us that, look, don't imitate this. This is a natural gift that Allah gives to certain people that they can speak. And he told me something, my son, he says he doesn't have that same gift. And it took me a while to recognize, like, that's not something I should expect from him. That's like something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he said something really fascinating. He said, only Allah knows how a person's going to be used. And so he mentioned that when he was studying, he really wanted to be a teacher. That was his like dream. He wanted to to teach. And you can imagine, if you want to emulate your teachers, you've been studying for 6, 7, 8 years. That's all you can imagine for yourself. And then when he graduated, the teacher said, well, we want you to actually go and translate the Arabic speeches or the Urdu speeches to the Arab audience in the masjid. And he's like, well, I want to be a teacher. Right. Well, they said, no, you're going to do public speaking, public translation, not even speaking.
I didn't know this about him. Wow.
Yeah. So he said for like a long time, that's all he was doing. He was just sitting in amongst the Arab brothers and he was translating. And he says, my Arabic wasn't even that great, but that's what I was doing. And subhanAllah, Allah knew that like I had this talent. And eventually, it led me completely away from teaching. So he actually taught me seerah.
And now he's become an icon of the Arabic language. His school, I think that you went to, is actually Arabic medium.
Yes,
too,
Arabic
right?
medium.
Yeah,
it's like the top school of Arabic instruction in Pakistan. And so he was just telling us that, look, you don't know how Allah is going to use you, right? You follow the instructions and guidance of your teachers, and maybe you'll end up being used in a certain way that you'll never have expected or imagined for yourself. So it wasn't even something he was planning. It was something that just kind of came about. And so he said when he was teaching us seerah, he said, look, I'm not a teacher anymore, right? I always imagined myself being a teacher, but he apologized and said, like, all I do now is public speaking. I don't have time to read books like I should if I was formally teaching. So I always took that as a lesson that a student of knowledge should not like imagine themselves in a single role, that I have to be on the public speaking circuit, right? And that's the wonderful thing about being in Chicago, I think, is that there are other opportunities. When I was studying in the Punjab, all I imagined myself doing was, being an imam, or being a public speaker, or being like a debater. But when I went to Karachi, then I saw like the field of Islamic finance, integrated Islamic education, journalism, astronomy. I was like, wow, ulama are involved and scholars are involved in all these different fields. We used to say, oh, we can see the sky now. Like the clouds have shifted, and now we see all these different opportunities. If students of knowledge know that that's out there for them, and they don't have to only serve Islam through public speaking, then I think that makes their knowledge much more effective. It's amazing. People don't know the teachers of Habib Umar, Mawlana Tariq Jamil. Like, I know their names because he would talk about them, but most people don't know the names. But these are the people that formed them and gave them their tarbiyah.
Yeah, it's usually the people in the background that do a lot of work, that do a lot of research.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
And go ahead.
And Mawlana Bilal. So on that note, here's the dichotomy I'm seeing, right? So my dad and I were talking last night. My dad was on the original board of a mega mosque in Ohio, like I think $6 million masjid, right? And he's still involved and whatnot. And we're talking about they're looking for an imam, and I always tell them like, hey, listen, I don't think that you guys are treating your imams right, personally speaking. Like you guys are not paying enough. They're underpaid. They're not getting the right benefits, and then you expect them to be like Imam Mahdi. I looked at the job description, and it's insane. It's like 20 bullet points on there, right?
Right.
So I actually feel that public speaking and collecting honorariums in a way is the way for mashayikh to level the playing field, so they can necessarily maybe dedicate. I think it can get slippery though, because if you get too comfortable with just public speaking and collect like really awesome honorariums and get spoiled, then it might distract you. So it might take a real special person to do that. But I've met a lot of ulama who say like, you know what, I've got to like do a side job as a social worker or this or that or I got a code because at the end of the day, imamship doesn't pay, and I would like to be able to be self-sufficient enough where I can, dedicate more time to research and teaching, etc.
Yeah, I think actually we have to be precautious. And again, I'm not speaking about any of the public speakers out there because I know most of those public speakers, and I think that the ones who are doing such an excellent job are the exception to the rule. Like most of us won't know the ones who are trying to be celebrities but are failing, maybe for good reason. But like if you look at this idea, and this is a temptation that can I use my Islamic knowledge, my Quran and Hadith, in order to earn a living? I mean, that's very dangerous. Ibrahim ibn Adham, I believe, once said that I would prefer to use like musical instruments to earn my dunya than to use my deen to earn my dunya,
Oh, that's awesome.
Because
Shaykh Amir?
yeah, I mean, it's better to use something that's haram to acquire dunya.
Time to pick up the guitar, buddy.
So this alternative, this idea that like you have your own like job, and then you also try to serve the deen. I think this is actually how ulama used to function up to the modern times. In the absence of government patronage, endowments, etc. I think that we should look at a scholar who is doing coding on the side, or maybe as his primary job, and then serving the deen, also using their knowledge as something that's honorable.
Yeah.
And encourage that. At the same time, we need as a community, try to establish endowments where we recognize that there's certain talents that are being wasted.
Totally.
And that if we can get this individual to serve 100% of their time in research or in teaching, then that is ideal. But I don't think that students of knowledge should feel like they're like doing a disservice to their ilm, because istighna, this idea of independence, is very important to knowledge. I mean, this is what all my teachers taught me. That don't ever make your knowledge subservient to the dunya. It's better to be just a person who's earning his living, not using his deen, than to make the deen subservient to people. And it's interesting. I was reading recently a hadith of Umar ibn Sa'ad, who was the son of Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. And during like the turmoil that was taking place in Medina, he comes to his father, who's outside of Medina with his herd, his flock. So he's coming from afar, and Sa'ad radiallahu anhu sees him, and he says like, "A'udhu billahi min sharri hadha rakib." He knows that something not good is going to be said. He's going to encourage him to kind of go out there in the public. And so when his son comes to him, he says to his father, he says, "Oh, my father, how long are you going to be here with the animals, where people are disputing the leadership in Medina?" And so Sa'ad radiallahu anhu says, "Uskut, silence, be silent. For verily I have heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, Inna Allah yuhibbul ʿabd at-taqī al-ghani al-khafi." That Allah loves the slave who is taqi, God conscious, and muttaqi, and he is ghani, independent, and he's khafi. He's like not known. He's hidden.
Yeah. So on that note of people who like are independent, obviously you've worked in the past with Darul Hikmah and now Darul Qasim, and in Chicago we have Darul Salam. There's a lot of these institutes that provide people who have day jobs in whatever field the opportunity to study Islamic sciences full time. So for these people, what's their end goal? Is it what do you think their end goal should be? Should it be just to learn for the sake of continuously learning? I remember a friend of mine was telling me one time that you believe that every Muslim should be able to dedicate 4 hours a week or something.
Yeah, that's my
to
pitch.
Study the deen.
Yeah, my pitch is that, if you can give 4 hours to working out a week or physical therapy, 4 hours of formal study is basically an expectation we can have for every adult. Yeah, adults. And actually, so when I came back from studying, and I was actually teaching for several years, I actually enrolled in an adult learning program, and that actually became my focus, what they call andragogy, adult learning theory. And we would come once a week, Thursday nights, have 6 hours of instruction. And because the students are self-motivated, they have experience, etc. It was actually quite effective as a learning experience. And so I think that a lot of us give ourselves excuses, and we say, well, we're too old. We're like 40 years old, 50 years old now. How am I going to study? Like, well, some of the companions started their quote unquote study of Islam at 40. I mean, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was around the age of 40 when he begins, and he's the best of the companions. And so these are adult learners, right? Umar radiallahu anhu, Uthman radiallahu anhu. And so the majority of companions are learning all of their Islam at an age that we would consider them beyond the age of studying. So I think that in institutions, and actually you mentioned a number of institutions' names, I don't think every institution does cater to adult learners. Darul Qasim is actually quite unique in that they do have quite a bit of focus on adult learning. In fact, Darul Qasim was founded on an emphasis on adult learning theory. And that's one of the reasons why I was really just sold on Darul Qasim, because I understood Shaykh Amin recognized that need. And that was my dream, to have institutions here and in the Muslim world where we do recognize that, look, we don't need to have full-fledged 12-year dedicated students of knowledge. If the student of knowledge, if that individual is already like a physician, he's already a lawyer. But we do need to give them some background, some training, and then enough like knowledge of the common language that needs to be developed within each interdisciplinary field, so that like a physician can interact with a scholar, an alim, and like be able to now collaborate on a medical ethics discussion. Or like, this is interesting. I once was a study partner of a 70-plus-year-old world-renowned economist, and he had worked for the World Bank for most of his life. And then he said, okay, I want to study the religion, I want to study deen. So he went to Mufti Muhammad Taqi Uthmani, and he asked him about all these questions of Islamic finance, because he's one of the top authorities in Islamic finance. And he came back like completely confused. He says he didn't understand what I was saying. Oh, I don't think that I was able to make him understand what I was saying. There was no common language. So he decided to enroll in an institution, the Madrasat al-Hasanain, and he recognized that it was probably like he wasn't able to convey his ideas in a way that was, I think digestible to your average student of Islamic law, who uses the terms like murabaha and ijara, etc. And so he was actually studying beyond the retirement age basics like sarf and nahu, basic grammar, conjugations, etc., so that he could just develop some of this common language. So now if you're sitting with a scholar who's a specialist in Islamic law, how do you interact? And how can you develop like new policies or methodologies in order to develop a new field? Like in I think Human was here last week. Was he here last week? Right? Yeah. And he was speaking about an Islamic psychology. Well, you need to have now experts in Islamic studies, and you need to have experts in mental health, and they need to be able to converse in a common language. And the way that they can do that is that if both of them are studying some degree of knowledge of the other field, right? So it's like when I sit with a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and they're speaking about Freudian theory, or even like some type of like behavioral therapy, it shouldn't be absolutely like foreign to me. And then when I speak to like a clinical psychologist like Human, if he knows like what like muraqabah is, so he, like, for example, I'll give you an example. Like, let's say you take mindfulness training. Mindfulness training is something that's being adopted now in Western spiritual psychology discussions or circles as a means of behavioral therapy, but it's actually from like a Buddhist root, right? It comes from Buddhism and the idea of like meditation. So now people want to Islamicize that and say, okay, let's sprinkle a little Islam on top. Let's find some Quran or some Hadith that like justifies mindfulness training. But when we have the specialist who comes to me and says, well, mindfulness training is coming from this background, right? Do we have an alternative in Islam? And I'm okay, well, what is mindfulness training? And they talk about this. I'm like, well, that's basically muraqabah, and that's basically sabr, and that's basically this and that. Hey, let's like now develop a new language to take this concept from a more like intrinsically Islamic background, and let's propose this in a new field of Islamic psychotherapy.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, right? But like, for example, this guy's Sims in IT. You have a computer science background, coding,
right?
How do you integrate Oracle databases and coding to like? Okay, so you have your day job, you're database administrator. Sounds like the most boring gig on the face of the earth. Am I right?
Right, it is.
Okay, and then you study. Let's say you're in a Darul Qasim, Shaykh program or the bachelor's program. How do you integrate like these two things?
Well, I mean, that's an excellent question. In some fields, it's very obvious. A person's like an academic physician, so they're going to use their knowledge of medicine to develop an Islamic bioethics. In IT, it's a little more challenging, but there was a student of mine who asked this question. He was doing a PhD in I think I forget what field, but he was developing like infrared technology, and I think it was at the PhD level he began to ask an important ethical question, which is that I think my technology is going to be used for, like smart bombs. So like all this that I'm doing, like on the face of it, if you ask a scholar that, well, is it okay to study the science? Yes, of course it's okay. And is it okay to study this, in this field? Yeah, it's okay. But then you have to ask yourself the bigger question that, like, what am I doing with this knowledge? Like, if you're in IT and you're developing software or you're coding, is it really the case that Islam has nothing to say about that field? At the end of your study, you're like, well, is this technology that I spent my entire, last 6-7 years on, is it going to be used for something that I can see like cohesive with Islamic principles? And it's like, well, no, if you're going to be like dropping bombs on civilian populations.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask you is after your education from Maulana Jamil School, I'm sorry, I forget the name.
Madrasat
al-Hasanain. And then after that, you went to Darul Karachi, right?
Yeah, Darul Karachi.
And then how much time do you spend there approximately?
I spent 1 year in Darul Karachi. Excuse me. I spent 1 year at Darul Karachi, and that was my Hadith, what they call the Doro Hadith year. And then after that, I did like a short Islamic finance course, but it wasn't very long. And I wanted to pursue actually Islamic finance. I thought that was something really relevant. But I actually found it to be quite boring. So, and that's actually one of the things that I was talking about. It's like there are a lot of opportunities for students of knowledge. You can go into a whole variety of fields. You shouldn't feel stuck. So what happened was that I after that I ended up meeting one of the kind of hidden gems of our ummah, one of the preeminent scholars of hadith, Dr. al-Halīm al-Nuʿmānī, also called Dr. al-Halīm Chishti, who's Sheikh Hamza Maqbool's a spiritual guide as well. And he's just a phenomenal scholar. He has a PhD in library sciences, but he's actually a master of hadith. And then so I ended up not pursuing further studies at Darul Qasim. I went to Jamiat al-Ulum Islamiyya, also called Newtown. Studying there.
Yeah. And I think, is that because I know that you're kind of known as an individual who focuses not only encouraging research, but you have a side to you which is a spiritual side that you encourage. Maybe not outwardly all the time, but it's definitely embedded within your khutbahs and your talks, and you have an awesome way. I remember you explained I was at IFS, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I was there with my students because I asked my students.
You should have been giving the khutbah. I don't know why I was giving the khutbah.
No, man. So it was actually 3 years ago. So on Fridays I make sure that my students pay attention to the khutbah. So we talk about on Fridays what the khutbah was about, and you talked about khushu', right? And people thought you were talking about cricket because you were talking about a cricket player. No, it was cool though because you embedded something about tazkiyat an-nafs, which is khushu', which is what one of our our prayers depend upon it. And you're talking about a cricket player who's saying, and if I misquote what you said, but I remember this very well because me and the students talked about this 3 years ago. You said that when the bowler pitches it to the individual who's batting, khushu', he defined it as, or it may have been you defining, I can't remember what it was, that when everything outside, all the noise of all the crowd and chanting goes away, and you just have to see which way the ball is coming and the way you concentrate on it when it comes to you, when the spin is, whatever. And you have to see, I'm butchering it right now because you elaborated a lot of time on that. And the way the ball spins and how all the sound around you goes away. And your focus is just, that focal point is just on the ball and the direction that it's going in. And you have to make sure that the bat connects with it.
Right.
Right? And it was awesome because you were just talking about cricket and the story itself was intriguing, but you related to khushu'. And it made it very relative, right? And I saw a lot of your khutbahs that I witnessed of your khutbahs. They're very not outwardly, oh, you have to purify yourself, go back to the Quran and Sunnah, which is very general statements that people make, but they're not really giving direction. But you gave like a really good example, and so I see that now I'm kind of understanding where that purification of the soul, the tasawwuf, the tazkiyat an-nafs, specialization comes into play.
But cricket, like people watch cricket, like their stadiums.
Yeah, I was gonna say somebody after one. I think I gave that example once in a khutbah before, and someone said, "That's you got to be relevant, brother. Like, use baseball. Why are you using cricket?" Yeah, I was like, "Well, the guy who gave me the example was a cricket star."
No, right? It was awesome because it doesn't know what people say.
Yeah, I don't know if you know. Like this was a famous cricket star named Saeed Anwar. Yeah. And the interesting thing was that actually I think this was the occasion because I met him several times. Once I met him, I was in Islamabad and we were a student Jamaat. And Mawlana Hashim Sahib's son was with us, Mawlana Yusuf Jamil, and he called Junaid Jamshed marhum and rahimahullah, and he said, "Hey, can you come? We're in the middle of a university campus, and we want students to come. Can you come?" He says, "Yeah, I can come." And Saeed Anwar's with me too. And why don't you come to my shop and book up? And they were so nice, and they came, and I remember I was a little 21 years old or something, and Junaid Jamshed calling me Amir Sahib. I was the Amir of that small Jamaat, and he's like, "Amir Sahib, you want me to give bayan?" He'll give I'm like, "Okay, this is great." And they just took over, mashallah, and then they were giving these really relevant examples. And so Saeed Anwar was actually at that time he just retired. He was the top world star. And in batting, and use the term bowler. That's very appropriate. See, that's relevant to you guys, not to everybody.
I used to live with Brits when I was in Egypt, and they ordered a TV just to watch the World Cup, and then they got rid of it after it was finished.
I never got into cricket, but he gave a really interesting. He was saying that there's a thing called a duck in cricket, where if you get out without any points. And so he said that in the beginning of his career, he was very talented, but he said that if you have, even for a moment, that first pitch or bowl, if you are thinking about what people are going to say or that you're going to get out in a duck, you're going to get out. And so he said, that's where I learned khushu', that I recognize the example that if you can't learn to zone everything out, right, and you even for a moment are thinking about the crowd noise or what people are going to think afterward, how many points you're going to get, you're thinking about getting a century, they call it a century, 100, then you're going to get out. And I think that was the example that he gave. And I'm like, that's a real, and he was very sincere about that. He said, I understand. The story
was very sincere.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same in baseball too. I found that the moment you want to try or do a little bit more than what is natural to you is when you strike out and you end up doing nothing for your team.
Right.
You have to just do what comes naturally to you and focus in on what the task at hand.
Right.
Yeah.
But to your point, I don't know. I just want to clarify. I don't claim any skill or expertise in spirituality, But like our teachers used to say to us that, when we were graduating, this was one of the last advices or pieces of advice that Mufti Muhammad Uthmani gave, was that now start your spiritual journey. They used to actually, when you were studying in a formal school, they used to not allow you to have connection to like a spiritual mentor in a formal way, and not to do a lot of like ibadah on the side, because they wanted you to focus on your studies. In fact, they used to tell us that make your sunnahs very short and go back to your studies, because like this is like 8 years, 10 years, you're just gonna study. Then when you're
but
done,
it's letting you know your role though.
Yeah,
it's producing an individual that knows, hey, you know what? It lets you know your responsibility. That's awesome.
And it's kind of counterintuitive in a sense.
Not really, man. I see it now. I see what he's talking about.
Because like I would think that because like for example, I figured having spirituality would motivate you to study harder.
Let me tell you something, and this may sound a little corny or a little nerdy, but I'll tell you one thing. When I was studying fiqh al-Muqaran, comparative fiqh, in my last 2 years in Azhar, I'm telling you, the amount of discussion, how much I used to love it, and maybe it's a weakness in me, but that closeness, because that's what spirituality really means. What we mean by that is breaking down the barriers between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Going closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what tazkiyat al-nafs and the epitome of tahajjud and the philosophy behind tahajjud and the aim and objective behind tahajjud is being close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and building a relationship to worship Allah as if you see Him, and if you don't see Him, know that He sees you. And that relationship for me was built through comparative fiqh. Like, I could stand up in tahajjud, that's fine, even though I don't. And I could do as much dhikr as I wanted to, but for me, those studies, that's what it did for me, That's me, though. So I think a lot of times for students who really love the science and see how the rules and regulations are being manifested through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech and the doings and sayings and acceptance of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I think that itself is a whole different, I'm not saying it's a better level, but for them, that's very suffice.
No, I think it is.
It's very suffice.
Shaykh Abdul Fattah Bukhuda speaks about the original organic form of spiritual development, which was like the Shaykh of Tariqah and the Shaykh of Ta'aleem.
Yeah.
It was the same person. And in fact, I think in Mauritania, they're still very much like that. If you're studying tafsir, you're studying hadith, Bukhari and Muslim, and you're not like spiritually developing by that, then there's something wrong, Then I don't know how much a speech is going to help you, or sitting in a spiritual lodge is going to help you. What we're talking about is a different type of development, a more personal development under the guidance of an individual, and that is something that the mashayikh will always say, that now that you're like you are representing the Islamic intellectual tradition, make sure that you balance that also with the new challenges in the spiritual church.
And I think people don't understand that, because this is a dilemma I had. I don't know if you had this dilemma. After I came back from the first or second year of studying and this and that, I didn't really like going to darses that much. Like, people were having darses and talks in the masjid. They go, come on, this so-and-so's having a dars. And I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. It just didn't do anything from, like, I'm not saying like I'm not a layman anymore and I'm this. But did you get that sense that after you studied through these heavy books, like, and people are having a dars in the masjid, and they're like, hey, aren't you going to come to the dars? I was like, I really don't feel like going. Like, what's wrong with you? I was like, I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe I'm bad.
I don't. Yeah, I think everybody in any field will have that feeling if they advance it to some certain degree. They need more. They need more specialized discussion. They're more advanced discussion. A lot of times when we talk to our mashayikh for a long period of time, it rubs off. You want that again.
There's nothing like that. Yeah. So did you ever have that experience where people are like, come on, you're not going to come to the talk, man? You're not going to come to the dars at the masjid, bro?
Yeah. No, I definitely feel that all the time. It's actually a struggle. But that's the thing, is that, that's why staying connected with your teachers, my teachers, has been absolutely essential, because it is difficult then to go to just a gathering, and that's kind of also why I like to use my khutbahs and spend Friday nights in my halaqas kind of reading Ghazali and Ibn Qudam al-Maqdisi's Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. Because
you have a Friday night halaqah?
Yeah, we have Friday night halaqah at Masjid Uthman. It's after Maghrib, and we actually speak a lot about these kind of basic spiritual things, and it's really useful. Just because I think graduates of madrasa programs need it sometimes more than anybody else.
Yeah. So, like, when we're talking about spirituality, I want to segue into like spirituality for the layman, because I'm going to refer back to something you tweeted a few years back.
Oh no!
Don't worry, it's not like holding you accountable. What do you have to say about this? It's not one of those things.
It's called the success of the tweet was Sheikh Hamza retweeted. That's how it came up on my feed. The success of a masjid isn't in how many youth come to play b-ball, but how many have a meaningful spiritual experience there. So
yeah, So, I mean, this is like, I think that was probably prompted by discussions in the development of one of the masjids, maybe even with Masjid Uthman. And we were talking about, because there's a lot of pressure, like, we need to have a gymnasium, we need to have a pool, you need to have, and I'm like, well, those are great. But, if you have like a rec center nearby, that goal is accomplished of getting the youth a place to kind of have their recreation. The primary focus of the masjid is that when the youth come to the masjid, they have to have a spiritual environment. They need to feel welcome there. They need to feel like, I can sit comfortably in this halaqah and I'm going to gain something in language that they understand. And so the primary function of the masjid shouldn't be sacrificed for secondary goals. That was my main thing. Like, you want to have a banquet hall in the masjid because you need revenue, or you want to have a gym. Well, I remember in Islam Foundation back in the day, there were a lot of us who used to come play basketball and then leave. No, didn't come because we were wearing shorts or whatever. We didn't want to come to the masjid.
I think that's the majority of people. That came and played.
But at the same time,
which has it's useful.
It was useful for us that we were able to keep in touch with each other and form friendships that have last lifetimes. That's how me and Sheikh Amir met when we were kids, by our local mosque having that gym. Instead, we would have been out, or we would have fought with our parents, like, oh, let's stay home. Jimmy's gonna pick me up, and we're gonna go. we're gonna go out for a Sunday, and then we're gonna play some basketball. And
but imagine, what I think the context of that tweet was that, imagine then you come to the masjid, right, and you're kind of sweaty, maybe. I remember this. I kind of had these traumatic experiences sometime in my childhood, that I was afraid of getting yelled at the masjid, And if you're coming to the masjid and you're using the facility, but it's not like in harmony with the kind of the environment of the masjid space, then, you're kind of missing the point. You're not going to get them into the masjid by just building a gym. Right. You have to move beyond that and focus on, do we have the people in leading the halaqas in the masjid? Like, I'll give you an example. I went to a university town, and I spent a long time getting some young guy who came from Pakistan, and this guy was loaded with tattoos, and he had earrings and all piercings and all over his face.
Pakistani guy?
Yeah, he's a Pakistani guy. And so obviously, and then he's like just from Pakistan. He's like fresh from Pakistan, because you could tell from his accent. And so he was very conscious of that, right? And I said, don't worry about it. Let's come to the masjid. There's a really nice, there was a imam there, or there was a sheikh there. And I remember before the salah, before I'd gotten to this person's place, like, he was giving this wonderful lecture. And so I finally convinced him to come. And when he came, he walked into the masjid, and the sheikh just stopped his lecture. It was a post-salah kind of a short lecture. And he looks at him, and he's just like, please leave the masjid. He just told him, like, you can't come in the masjid looking like that. Right? Wow. And it really hurt me, because I wanted to be able to give that imam a context before that, but he acted so quickly. I mean, he wasn't a trained scholar. He was like, I think it was a university town. He must have been like a graduate student from somewhere who had self-studied some hadith or something like that. And so he was, I mean, I'm not going to have a huge expectation, but like, if you don't have trained then scholars who have been in the company of spiritual people, it's easy for someone to make that mistake. And then the function of the gym is lost. The kids are not going to want to come into the masjid. That's my kind of experience. I remember that in Taraweeh at Islamic Foundation, oftentimes you would see in like the gym a lot of kids that would never come into the masjid, but there were obviously a lot of kids who would come to the masjid and who continued to attach themselves. So there's definitely a function of those spaces. My point was that let's put money into prioritizing the masjid space. Like, in old Egypt and in actually everywhere in the Muslim world, there used to be endowments for a certain chair of knowledge in the masjid. So there was a kursi of hadith, there was a kursi of Bukhari. People would give their entire estate to the funds for having a dars of Sahih al-Bukhari in a masjid. And so the masjid was very alive, right? They were experts, the best of the best were teaching in these huge, large masjids. And so these masjids had a certain feel to them. Like, if you go to Masjid Nabawi, there's a spiritual feel to it. There's like a tranquility. There's a welcomeness there. And that was kind of the context of that.
I'm pretty sure, I was at Masjid Nabawi. I think I was playing hoops on the roof, though.
Wait, Masjid Nabawi?
Yeah, there's a basketball court. You don't know about it?
Are you serious?
Yeah. It's like full court and ball. glass door, NBA. It's like a breakaway.
What are you saying, dude? Are you being serious or joking? You got a pretty serious. No,
I don't know. You got to go to Umrah.
There's a library. There's a library on top, I think.
Yeah, dude. There's a few libraries there. What are you talking about?
I saw Shaquille O'Neal and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf up there. They were going at it.
No, so I mean, like, if
what is he doing?
If the masjid
starts spicing things up.
Well, like let's take the example though. I know what you're trying to say, but I think like let's say the masjid wanted to invest on a YMCA type of thing. YMMA, you remember what? YMMA and buy a building.
Association.
Yeah, you remember that old school. See, you YMMA as well. Yeah, I remember that. So let's say you buy a building for that purpose. That'll accomplish the purpose. But now if you have this masjid space and you have like a couple acres of land and you're going to use all of that land for a banquet hall and a gym and other things, and then the masjid, you're not putting in a lot of money. You should have 4 imams, you know, and you should have 4 teachers, and you should. That was really the question.
Well,
investment.
So, in order for it seems like masjids nowadays to be even taken seriously, I agree with you. The different roles that you are envisioning for a masjid, but in order to be a center of a community, I think people are envisioning a masjid to be a jack of all trades, where it's got that rec room, it's got that banquet hall, it's got things like what you want, like an endowment center and a center of knowledge and spirituality. And if you're not fitting into all these categories, at least in Chicago, because Chicago is such a huge, thriving Muslim community, you're kind of getting relegated to the small masjid status, and you're not really in the conversation. Really, like you're not mentioned among like the big mosques like IFS and Dar Salaam and some of the big masjids that are in the Chicagoland area, right?
I guess what you're trying to say is like a lot of because the reality is, I don't know percentage wise, but there's a lot of youth under fringe. And that's the only, essentially, whether it's right or wrong.
I'm just talking about conversation. You want to be in the conversation so that people are donating money to you, that people believe in your building and what your building is bringing to the community. And if you're hitting all those marks, those check marks of, community building in, bringing the young people to the mosque, and you're a center of spirituality, and you're a center of knowledge, and you're a place of weddings and reception halls. If you're hitting all these benchmarks, then people will donate to you. You're in the conversation in every social circle.
I think not every masjid can. I think nobody's saying that there shouldn't be masjids like that. They are possibly going to be like that. But even if you look at the way the Muslim community is now, let's just say there was a Muslim community that was able to touch upon all of those, it would be very, very hard for it to be successful of utilizing all that manpower with all of its efficiency and money. Like you would have to have an entire government, like that Turkish masjid that was made that actually is funding that. People are not going to be able to fund that through donations. So I think that there has to be masjids that are known to be those small masjids that are kind of, if you want to visit how it was to be back in the Sahaba's time, those masjids, they have to exist, where it's just bare bones, just the roof and the walls, but you have some awesome quality scholarship and awesome quality, dars there. But then there has to be those, obviously, that they have a rec center. And I think that maybe sometimes, overthinking things, that we think that every masjid has to be in a certain way. I'm not saying that's what you were saying, but I have talked to people that said, no, every masjid brother now, we should all have a rec center, we should all have a gym. I said, no, I think maybe some of them should in the community, where if we do want to take our kids, to a certain week to this masjid, we go there. But if you really want to take them to a masjid that has a different flavor, we should take them there too, because that's going to exist, right?
Yeah.
But I think some masjids should have it, but I think that if our revenue that's coming in, I think from banquet halls or whatever, we need to obviously start investing in other properties in order to support our masjid, so we don't ever have to ask for donations again.
Here's an idea: if anyone out there is building a masjid, get a swimming pool, all right, and Olympic-size swimming pool that.
I think that should be the only thing they should invest in.
That's the only thing you need to get. Yeah. Everyone from all parts of the country will come and use that.
Because so many brothers are complaining, man, I can't go swimming in a public place. Have like 3 days for the brothers, have 3 days for sisters. You know how many sisters want to swim, but they can't swim, and they never learn to because they could have never learned. Right? And my daughter's 8 years old. My wife is like, man, you better hurry up and teach her now, because she's going to get older, and then she's going to be in this environment where she can't go swimming in public and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, anyone, again, who's listening, forget about about the basketball courts. Forget all that. Invest in a swimming pool.
Yeah.
That'll be the best investment that a Muslim can ever make.
Sheikh Amir,
and have 5 lifeguards.
Yeah, you make a good point because, like, yeah, you don't need, like, in the Western burbs, you have IFS, you have Darul Qasim, you have Masjid Mustafa, you have Masjid Uthman.
Oh my God, you
ICOBT.
have all these places.
Yeah, they're all within like 5 minutes. You don't need every spot to be like decked out, right?
1 or 2 of them, that's fine. It's naturally understood that should be that way. That's fine.
But I want to talk about something Sheikh Mawlana Bilal had mentioned, which something, again, this is an outsider, foreign to me coming to Chicago. When I grew up in Ohio and my dad was going to grad school, we were on right off campus, Ohio State's campus, and there's like the local masjid there, a lot of grad students, but pretty vibrant masjid community, and there's a basketball court outside. And even like in the masjid parking lot, but even our non-Muslim friends would come and play ball there, and we'd go inside and we'd pray salah, whether it's Dhuhr or Asr, whatever time it was, we'd always break for salah. And I don't remember ever like worrying about, okay, I'm too sweaty, am I doing wudu? Is some uncle gonna care? I remember this is my first year here. I'm praying at IFS, and it's after Salah, and I'm whispering to my friend who's visiting from Ohio, and we're just chit-chatting real quick, and some uncle just rips into us. He's like, why are you guys talking in a masjid? You guys have beards. You should know better. Yada. This dude had no beard. So, like, and I was kind of like, I wasn't used to that, and I thought about it later. And I was like, that never would happen in Columbus. You know, we were just, everything was very, I don't know what it was. It was like very laid back, right? Yeah. And I told my friend back in Ohio, like another friend, and he was like, man, if that happened to me, man, I would have told the uncle, meet me in the parking lot, I'm gonna knock you out. Because you're gonna diss me like that. And I'm like, who are you, dude? Like,
so you're saying the culture is the different.
Yeah, I think that's what. I mean, I don't know where.
So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like, I can sympathize. So I have one point. Like, I recognize that our generation doesn't have a lot of resilience. We don't have a very thick skin. So if this was happening somewhere else, maybe like, you know, no matter what they're saying, and an elder in the community, they say something is even wrong, and you take it because there's like a certain hierarchy, social hierarchy that you recognize that there's an adab for. But sometimes it becomes so commonplace for this to happen in masjids that the environment it's not regulated, and so people like that get a very loud voice. Yeah, and then they have like a certain place in the masjid, and they become the loud speaker. Like they'll grab the mic and make announcements without permission, and if you allow that culture to be there, and where does that culture come from? That oftentimes comes from not investing in the human resources of the masjid, where you have like an imam who has a position. Like if you go, and even Chicago, look at Mosque Foundation. I mean, I haven't gone there like very frequently, but when I go there, I feel like Imam Sheikh Jamal has a presence. Yeah. You can't say anything. You can't just stand up and be like, brothers, do this. Sheikh Jamal sits after Salah, he's looking at you. You know he's got everything in control. Yeah. You know? And that's the position, I think, in the imam. You have to invest in these imams who can serve that role. I'll tell you, Masjid Mustafa, you come to Masjid Mustafa, it's going to be very rare that you have one of those experiences there, because at least at Jummah prayer, because I've tried to make it very clear to people that like when even a student of knowledge comes and gives a khutbah, he's probably got more knowledge than anybody else who's listening to the khutbah. So don't go up to him afterwards and harass him about some detail, some statistic that he misquoted about like divorce rate in the Muslim community, you know? Because oftentimes that I've told people this, like, you'll have a young student of knowledge, and they're obviously not perfect. They might make a mistake in their khutbah, but if you create such an environment of chaos in the masjid where anybody can say anything, after the khutbah, this guy, he felt like he did something good, and you come and you blast him, you harass him, some random uncle comes to you, why did you shouldn't say this, or brother imam, you should say this, and you should do this, and we should do that. Then you discourage a growth in the community, and I think that's oftentimes the experiences that we're having in the masjids, that we're not checking these voices. Like if it happens randomly, like if it happens once in a while, that's understandable. Yeah, but definitely. When that becomes just like the norm,
the masjid should be. I think the best way I can think of this is the masjid should be, if anything happens or any dilemma happens, people should just say, hey, let's go ask the imam. Let's say what the imam has to say about this, instead of standing up and correcting and yelling at somebody, right? That's the environment that should be built, right? And by the way, Masjid Mustafa, are you responsible for Masjid Mustafa? Or?
I'm in charge of the khutbahs.
Okay,
yeah, I'm in charge of the khutbahs. And Masjid Uthman and Masjid Mustafa, I'm involved in the board, loosely involved with Islam Foundation. But my voice, I mean, I'm very particular about this, that I want people to feel comfortable coming. Like I went to Urbana-Champaign, right, for about 2 years. That masjid has like a very comfortable vibe. Like everybody go.
I love that place.
Have you seen? Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, like everybody lives
there. Yeah.
Yeah, everybody comes there for salah. I mean, like, before cell phones, everybody would meet at the masjid. Young guys would do them. We do dumb things in the masjid. We used to play football at nighttime in the masjid, get like the Nerf football stuck up in the in the dome. But the thing is that it was like, you felt also like when there was an authority that would come into the masjid, you were respectful as well. But I think that we want to make people feel comfortable in the masjid space first. I think that's the khulasa, like the summary of my idea about how masjid should be, is that to make sure that the masjid space is serving its function first. That's your priority. Put all your money there. It takes a lot of money to manage a swimming pool. Yeah, trust me.
I know.
And that same money, if you're not willing to pay for the best of the best in terms of imams in your masjids, then I think it's better to prioritize that imam.
Exactly. But I think that if that proper investment is made, those two things, the scholarship and the swimming pool, I really love.
They're not exclusive. Yeah. They're not mutually exclusive. Yeah.
But I think that if you want to invest, man, just invest in those two things. Forget about even how decorated the masjid is, and how beautiful it may seem, the walls are not as important as the people that are inside,
True, because I've never heard of some like Muslim, so a non-Muslim converted to Islam because the masjid looks so dope.
No. It's rather some people would see have a humbling experience in a humbling hut-looking place that has amazing personalities inside of it.
Right.
That how are these people so amazing, and they're just so they don't care about the world that much, especially in their place of worship. I know one of my friends, he was praying at and I'm not saying anything bad about the masjid, but in Morocco, the Masjid Sultan al-Khamis, the second biggest masjid in the world.
Is that the one off the sea?
Yeah. I went there too. So he went there. I had a connection flight, but he's a Moroccan dude. He's like, every time I go there and pray, I've never thought about prayer. I'm just looking at the designs while I'm praying. And so we don't want the masjid to, there's a marriage.
At the same time, you don't want the masjid to be smelling like
No.
sweaty
We're not
socks.
talking about smelling. We're talking about a humble look, but it should be clean. It should be pure.
In our culture, where we got the humility down pretty well sometimes, in certain mosques, where they're like, no, brother, we're not going to change that carpet. It's pretty disgusting, but we're not about the dunya here. Like, brother, but I can't concentrate because this carpet stinks. So
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean. But there's always a balance, right? We have to find a balance in everything.
So there's a difference. Just because something looks beautiful doesn't mean it doesn't. Everything should be clean, right? Regardless of how simple it may look. Yeah. But that my main point is that how amazing now this paradigm would be is that if the masjid is very simple and not very fancy, but you have amazing personalities developing other humans in that masjid, right? I mean, that's an awesome masjid. Right?
Dude, and in the mosque where you just come in, especially when you're alone, like sometimes I go from work and I go to pray Dhuhr, right? And the mosque is empty and it has that serene feeling. That is better than anything. Yeah. That feeling you can't even describe to anyone. I know. Just that quiet time where you're praying,
Sure. Yeah. So Mawlana Bilal, is that the solution, I guess? Because honestly, I'll be like, okay, you and Shaykh Amir spent like years studying overseas, and a company, and everyone knows that proximity to spiritual individuals will lead to an increase in spirituality, right? Plus the knowledge you guys have, etc. And me and Sim, we're just IT guys, we're engineers, working day jobs, dealing with like I'm not gonna say, but
he's gonna say it anyway. Go ahead. I'm not gonna say. He's gonna say it anyway. Go ahead. He's our loose cannon, by the way. He makes things fun in here.
Dealing with kafir chicks.
Isn't that a type of buttermilk you get? Kafir? What are you talking about?
you know what I mean? So. But like I want to be on your level spiritually too, right? But like I got like I guess bills to pay.
You don't want to be on my level spiritually. Maybe be Shaykh Amir's level spiritually, but you want to be in
I got Jordans to buy and bills to pay.
No, so that's the thing. I think that's where my 4 hours comes in. Like I think 4 hours of formal study. Like formal study is very spiritual. Formal study. Initially, it's it's kind of like when you heat up and you purify gold, right? You have to heat it up. It's like mashaqqa. There's a difficulty involved, right? Sarf and nahu and grammar and some of the basics really like kind of start to purify you. It's really boring for a little while, but man, I mean, if you're studying Hadith, right? I teach. I mean, I'm blessed to be in the department of Hadith at Darul Qasim, and it's like I sometimes get really emotional thinking about how blessed I am to be in that department. To every day go home and my job is to like review hadith and read hadith and then go teach hadith to students who are asking questions about hadith. Qala Allah, qala Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if you're like in a setting, but that's what it's going to have a profound effect on your heart.
And I think that's where it is. I think, and I don't mean to cut you off, but a lot of times we want, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but we want the spiritual change. But he just pitched a 4-hour thing, and I'm just saying to the listeners, not yourself, a 4-hour study, and everyone's always going to complain. Imam Ghazali would complain about his spiritual state. No one's going to stop complaining about their spiritual state ever. Umar radiallahu anh asked Hudayfa radiallahu anh, was I from amongst the 70 people that Muhammad Sallallahu had a list of hypocrites, right? No one's ever going to be satisfied with their spiritual state. That's the first thing we have to understand. And the second thing is you have all these options. 4 hours a week, if you really think about it. I know Tim Ferriss said that 4-hour work week, right? You should pitch it differently, 4-hour dars week, or I don't know, something 4-hour. But that's so awesome, 4 hours a week. And you can do it right there, you'll start seeing a change.
I guess, you're right. Okay, so let
and not in just Chicago, I should say.
You're being in proximity of scholars too. I mean, somebody who's responsible, you're teaching that too? Somebody whose sole job is just to research hadith, and now you can just build a relationship with him and chill with him.
And Chicago is unique, and it has programs designed for, as you mentioned, Darul Qasim has evening classes. It's got weekend classes. I believe other institutions may. I don't want to say without certainty, but I know at Masjid Uthman we also have evening classes for working adults, the pre-collegiate level classes, what we call them, pre-collegiate level classes. And to be very honest, a lot of it is not. It's not just academic stuff. It's very personal. I mean, students will stay after and ask personal questions about stuff they're dealing with.
We had Shaykh Amin on too, right? And I mean, he's a person I really trust as far as running an institute of knowledge. I mean, mashallah, he's got the likes of Mawlana Bilal and other individuals. But I mean, you have an institute right here that you can just go there. You're not obviously you're a little far away.
Yeah. So here's the thing.
But that proximity is there too, right?
I want to give you my own personal example because maybe a lot of our listeners can relate. I think the listeners don't want to hear some theory. I'll break down my personal scenario, right? Okay, so I've got a full-time job, let's say 45, 50 hours a week, right? 30-minute commute, sorry. 30-minute one-way commute. One kid at home right now. This podcast, I've got some nonprofit guys always hitting me up to help out with some stuff. Okay, so and then I've got Arabic, 3 hours Wednesday night, Fawaki. Okay, then I'm trying to get to the gym a couple times a week at least. And if I have time, I'll try to go to Shaykh Amin's tafsir. But like you said, it's like a 40-minute drive to get out from like Bridgeview area to out here.
Yeah.
And then you got Sheikh Hamza's Maliki Fiqh course on Tuesday nights. So where I'm like 5 hours right now. If I'm doing Shaykh Amin's class, Mawlana Hamza's class, and then the 3-hour Arabic, I'm at 5 already.
Yeah,
right.
Do you think I'm like
you're on the way? And I think you'll feel that you'll need more sometimes. You'll need more personal interaction with Shaykh Amir or Shaykh Hamza, and you'll increase that on your own organically. But you're on the way. I mean, you've got a good schedule set up.
Well, my
and
thing
not only
is
that,
this.
you have to travel. Remember, that's one thing we have to understand is that you're actually traveling. When Rasulullah sallallahu people think that. They take the hadith, say Rasulullah said that, talabat al-ilm, the seeking of knowledge is fard upon every single Muslim, right? They think that means that you have to go and travel in some remote area of the world. That doesn't mean that. What he's saying is, number one, the way we should understand is that wherever you are, you have to seek knowledge, right? And the more you sacrifice for that, the more you're going to get out of it.
Yeah. If
I live 5 minutes from Darul Qasim, I'm not going to have that same value as you have driving 40 minutes. And one thing you realize, people who drive always the farthest to go to their classes are always earlier than the people who live close by.
And
I know. I live 4 minutes away from where I work. Yeah. And I'm never on time.
We had students in Darul Hikmah was around, and it's now merged into Darul Qasim's adult learning programs. But we had students coming in from Milwaukee and Rockford. And then there was one year, and I actually met some of these students that were coming in from Toledo, Ohio.
SubhanAllah.
Every Friday night, they would leave after Isha, get here by Fajr, pray Fajr, stay all Saturday, and then leave Saturday night.
Every weekend.
And how far is Toledo, Ohio? How far
4
was it?
hours? 6 hours.
Oh, 6 hours.
It took them about 6 hours. And I was driving from the East Coast this year twice, and when I got to Toledo, I'm like, oh my God, it's 5 or 6 more hours from here. Then I recognized the value and then how much that journey changed them, as opposed to some students who were complaining that, like, I'm coming from 30 minutes away, can you guys like do a Sunday program instead of Saturday, you know, like, can you accommodate my schedule? That rihla talab al-ilm, you're reviving this journey for seeking knowledge, is going to have an effect you won't be
you're
able
in
to see.
Chicagoland area, dude. So I mean, and it's not just saying, oh, you know what, yeah, it's hard, I have to do it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open pathways for you that you'll never imagine that He opened for you because you're doing that.
Right.
Because that 40-minute travel, even though to some people who travel 5 years and 5 hours, it may have seemed insignificant, but that 40 minutes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mend something for you that you'll definitely see the signs of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that for, sometimes we think of a dua, we haven't made a dua, and Allah makes it happen, right? Imagine that you're consistently doing something for 40 minutes. You're going to love that 40 minutes because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing something for you that nobody else knows. That's like your private time between you and Allah. You know, it's something that I think you'll definitely understand, inshallah.
This turned into like a therapy session for me.
Sorry, hey, you said I'm going to put everything on.
No, it's like, I'm sure other people are dealing with the same scenario. I've got a friend who comes to Shaykh Amin's class every week from Skokie, right? It's like a 40-minute haul, and he just hangs out and he tries to see for Shaykh Hamza's class.
Can I give you one example? So there was a student he's now leading the field of Islamic bioethics. You can check with him, Dr. Asim Padilla. But when he was in University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, he was
a terrible school, by the way.
He was driving once a month to take special classes with Shaykh Amin, Hujjatullah al-Baligh of Shah Waliullah, just to kind of understand like the ethics of medicine. And then he developed a field, and he got grants. You know, he's at University of Chicago. He started this initiative of Islam and medicine. That's a plug for free for Dr. Abdullah. But that was because like he valued that. And there's a student who comes, I think, Wednesday nights from Pennsylvania every week to Darul Qasim, and he doesn't go to the branches. He flies in. I think he's a new Muslim brother. He flies in once a week to take a class.
Allah.
And I mean, and trust me, Allah doesn't la yudhi'u ajra al-muhsinin. Like, Allah doesn't waste that ajr. You don't see it now immediately, as the Shaykh Amir is saying, but it's having an effect on you. It's gonna have, and if you're more you're persistent, and you're and al-istiqama fawqa al-karama, right? We always want like that miracle, but your persistence and your consistency, that's gonna actually be more effective.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to ask is, so for Arabic, right? I find like you know, we talked with Shaykh Amin about this. You mentioned a little bit. Shaykh, Arabic program at DQ is pretty dry, purposefully.
Yeah.
It's a weed out process. I wouldn't say my Arabic class is dry, but I find it very hard to like motivate myself. I know Sim's trying to study Arabic before too, and would you agree that's pretty much?
I've kind of given up on the whole institution process. I've been trying to do it more naturally by reading children's books, and
that's an awesome way to do it.
Just working my way up the grade levels from second grade level of reading to third and fourth and fifth and so on, you know, and that way I can measure. I have some measurable way of knowing how much I'm improving, and eventually growing my vocabulary also in a natural way, because the way my brain works is different from other people, and I think that the way I have to be taught is in a more comprehensive way, where I'm supposed to make that neural connection in my mind where this word means something because it was a part of a story in which one character had this feeling or whatever, you know, where you're kind of making that connection in your brain to a story rather than going through a dictionary and reading through a whole bunch of words and trying to memorize that, you know?
This is why he does all the editing of the podcast. He's a maestro of everything because he thinks this way. That OCD, awesome OCD-ness. That's why. but so one thing I tell people all the time is Sheikh Abu Hassan Nadwi's book. His book is used all over the world. It's an awesome book to have, and you talked about stories. So he recognized this, and he taught non-Arabs, I think, the way that non-Arabs should be taught. I'm not saying that Arabs can't teach non-Arabs Arabic, but the experience I've learned from both, and I've realized it takes somebody who his original mother tongue is not Arabic and who's learned Arabic to teach you Arabic, and it'll be a lot better, a lot faster, be a lot accelerated. And those of you who understand and speak Urdu, man, you've already conquered half of the vocabulary of the Arabic language, you know, so it's not far-fetched, you know. Even my mother, she's learning Arabic, and she started well over the age of 55, you know, and it becomes a lot easier. But Abu Hassan Nadwi's book, Qasas al-Nabiyyin, awesome book, you know, progressively. He has 5 volumes. First volume starts off very simple. Second volume gets harder. Third volume. It's a very awesome way to learn Arabic through stories. We learn languages through stories.
Here's another thing. there's also one of the worst things that could have happened for people who wanted to learn Arabic language was translated works.
Yeah.
You know, and not having that necessity there, like you're talking about, that need, that burning need to actually understand what you're reading, or reading some of the classical works that haven't been translated. That when you have that burning desire, the internal engine starts working on its own, so that you are working your way towards that goal, so that you can understand those classical works.
Yeah, man, I agree 100%. I couldn't have said it any better.
I think you might be more attracted to the direct method of learning language as opposed to the grammatical method, which is usually a little drier. And I think a lot of people actually will learn Arabic differently from the other.
Yeah,
right?
I was not a grammatical learner. Yeah. I actually I never thought I'd end up loving grammar, but I learned on a very practical basis on speaking to people and stuff like that, and had like basic books when I was in Mauritania. But then later on, 4 years later, I started seeing the wisdom in grammar, and I started loving it after that. Before that, I mean, stuff. I don't want to say I despised it, but I would just try to push it away by all means.
Yeah, and you read a tafsir, and you're like, I don't know what this grammar term means unless I learn that grammar and you appreciate it. But the thing I think everybody will experience this is that it's kind of like an uphill battle. Once you get to the top of the hill, you won't even remember the struggles before that, right? That precede that. Once you're like just cruising and you're reading this fiqh book, and it's like, wait a minute, I used to spend like a day figuring out a page, and I'm reading like 10 pages a day now. And you're understanding it, and you're thinking about it, and you're writing notes in it, and you'll forget the struggles of when you were a beginner student. So you just got to get over the hill.
No, and you have to find out what works for you. You know, you guys know the saying, necessity is the mother of invention. So as you're learning, you'll learn more about yourself more than anyone, that, hey, this mode of learning works better than other modes, and find out what works for you. It doesn't mean just because an institute or your sheikh or whoever is saying that, oh, this is the way he learned Arabic, that's the right way for you. It could be completely different for you, and find out what's working.
And one final point. So the 4 hours a week, we covered that for myself. Like, so, okay, that's 5 hours a week. But then we're not talking about any out of class time though yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think some spiritual, I won't call it class time, but like gatherings are also very, very helpful.
No, I mean for Arabic, right? I can't go to Arabic class for 3 hours and not do any and like not dedicate.
Oh yeah.
Hours
You always have to double. Yeah. No, my 4 hours was in class time, which means you're spending 8 hours out of class.
Okay, so
or
total
6 to 8 hours.
So 12 hours total.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's and then that's, again, you can still do the 4 hours alone, because a lot of adult learners are not going to be able to spend a lot of time outside of class. But then lower your expectations. Don't get too frustrated too early, and make it a longer journey. Right.
And that's the wisdom of starting off small. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people are like, well, I'm not matching the pace of the rest of the class, and they get frustrated. Well, you don't have to. You know, you'll be surprised how fast 10 years pass by. If your goal initially was, I want to finish this much in like 5 years, and you recognize, I just can't do homework. And you tell your teachers that, and they're like, well, we understand. Why don't you just keep coming to class? Maybe in 10 years, you'll finish the same amount of material, but like that 10 years will pass by really quickly.
And it's good to have teachers like that, because the thing is that sometimes it's intimidating being a student, because you think you're holding the class back. You think that you don't want to be, and sometimes that's what prevents us from asking questions, right? So teacher is not going to, a lot of times, especially nowadays, and especially like Mawlana Bilal just said to you, he's not going to be like, well, hey, you're keeping the class up, man. What do you have planned for, if you're not in this class? He's not going to come and have that talk with you.
But here's the thing, right?
By the way, just out of, I'm the academic advisor at Darul Qasim. So like, if you're actually taking classes already, just schedule an appointment with me and we'll talk about your, because that's what we do. We actually have.
Even if I'm not a Darul Qasim student?
Well, you would come into classes, you register for even if you're not, if you're interested in taking classes.
Because here's the thing, like, I've thought about doing the Shaykh the program, right?
Right.
But I'm like, I'm barely surviving Faizan's 3-hour Arabic class, Shaykh Hamza's Maliki fiqh course, and occasionally, Shaykh Amin's tafsir.
Yeah.
And partially for me, it's like, the mindset is like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to be in Chicago forever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to regret not having somebody like Shaykh Amin in my proximity. Like, let's say my steel mill shuts it down and I got to move to freaking Arkansas. Freaking like Blytheville, Arkansas, where there's like nothing. Like, don't get cell phone reception, right? And
you're going to be forced to learn. You're going to be the Imam there.
Yeah, that's a good.
It's like the blind leading the blind. But and then even now, to be honest, Mawlana Bilal, I'm thinking about, okay, so a lot of people spiritually develop, for example, their Shaykh Hussain, right? And I've been to Chicago, I don't know, almost a decade. I'm like, yeah, I've been to his Durus maybe 10 times. I listen to a lot of stuff when I'm driving, but not going out there. I'm like, I feel it different. But I'm like, and I'm like, man, I'm not going to regret this someday, man. I'm going to this you know what I mean?
You're very typical of our community. We're so hard on ourselves. You're doing so much. If you look at it from one perspective, you're doing 5 hours and you're working and you're doing this podcast and you're like, man, but I'm not going anywhere. Yeah, if you look at a person who is in Arkansas and Armpit, Indiana, wherever, right? That's Sheikh Hamza's term. You're not a blind person. You're the one-eyed man, at least. What is it? The one-eyed
monster?
No. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So you at least have one eye compared, and then you'll be surprised. You may actually be very, very aware. So I don't think you should be too hard on yourself, but at the same time, it does help to plan. So that's where you sit with your teachers, you take some time outside of class and say, well, this is my plan. What do you think? And the thing is, the most important thing oftentimes in our learning system is suhbah, just companionship, and then the tawajjuh of someone, someone paying attention to you, right? So if you're sitting in the class of Sheikh Hamza or you're sitting in the class of Sheikh Faizan, now they're concerned about you. And if you're well, I'm not going to be able to continue these classes, it's not all right, fine, you're not paying anymore, see you, I'll see you in the akhirah. It's going to be well, okay, let's come up with a plan where you can continue your studies. And even if that requires me to call you up a couple days a week, right? They'll do it because they see a desire in you.
Yeah.
So what you have to show, and this is the thing in Chicago, I tell people all the time, there are a lot of resources that are available out there. Just show your talab, show your desire, and Allah will make a way for you, inshallah.
And I know that we're pretty short on time now. And we still have a lot of awesome questions, so we need you back on the podcast. I know you said you're not far away. That was a big mistake. You shouldn't have told us that. We're going to be calling you up all the time now. No, but we really have to get to do some of these questions. But we're not going to be able to do that right now.
Can we ask one? You have one more point?
So I just wanted to know, I know that you're very busy. I know that you do lots of research, and I know that you do your own studies. And what does Sheikh Mawlana Bilal do to unwind? Or does he unwind? There are some people that unwind with knowledge also, right? So, but what do you do to unwind? Because I know you're very busy. I know you're coming off you're not doing anything, but you actually do lots of research. You do a lot of work. You do a lot of teaching. What do you do when you how do you unwind from all this?
Oh man, that's a good question. I don't have an answer to that question, unfortunately, because I don't think I'm very good. I'm not very good at it. And actually, I had a chance to sit with a number of imams and leaders in the Muslim community in the United States, and it seems like everybody's having the same struggle. I think it was Dr. Sherman Jackson was everybody had to discuss a personal challenge, and I think this is something I could share. And he said I'm still at this age. Dr. Jackson is saying that I struggle with the problem of not being able to say no. So he's always saying yes, and your family suffers, maybe even to some degree your career is suffering. But I think every imam struggles with just balance, not just work-life balance, but work balance. Also, different work you're doing. So I think for me personally, it's family, spending time with family,
mashallah. My
beautiful daughters, mashallah, and getting a hug from them is very relieving, of a lot of the stress that you have in the day. But more than that, it's just good friendship. And alhamdulillah, in Chicago, we have a lot of good people here, and that's also very, very helpful.
I was going to say something about table tennis. He's really a table tennis type guy, but
me back when I was a kid, maybe.
What about? Do you follow any sports teams?
Oh man, I think I follow sports just so I'm not out of touch. But I have a rule that I don't want to get emotionally attached to anything. Just awesome. Because then I know that I can control my That's
awesome.
So because of that, I'm on and off, but I'm not really good about I'm not that passionate about as much as I used to. My baseball team was the White Sox, and then they won the World Series when I was in Pakistan. So it was oh well, I wasn't even there when all I did was I emailed one of my old college roommates who was a Cubs fan, and I asked him just hey, assalamu alaikum, who won the World Series this year? And that was it. That was my gloating.
How did you become a White Sox fan?
Oh, that's if you had good attendance in the south suburb schools, you get free tickets to Sox games. So I was
Yeah.
You grew up in Southburbs?
Yeah, the Southburbs. Yeah, so we were supposed to be Sox fans.
Yeah, we got free Chicago Cubs tickets, so we became Chicago Cubs.
Oh, so you're
fans.
gonna? Yeah, well, I like Sandberg and was Dunston.
And
I grew up with
also,
them, but
Yeah.
Cubs would come on during the day, and our parents would never let us watch WGN, where the White Sox played at night. We never got to watch TV at night, so we ended up, becoming Cubs fans.
I didn't even know about. Dude, I was still confused until the World Series. Like while the World Series game was happening, I watched the World Series. Guys, first baseball game I ever watched from beginning to end ever in my life. I found out why then, and I'm still not sure why there's two Chicago teams.
Well, I guess with you got the black kufi and the white thoban.
White Sox colors.
It's not colors.
No, and right. I was at a Darul Hikmah retreat a couple years ago, and I had this like white Kamani thobe with like the diagonal zipper.
Yeah.
And like a White Sox hat with all the stickers still on there, like flat brimmed, and then like some black Chuck Taylors, and then like Sheikh Hamza and Azam Hashmi came up to me. They were like, "Yo, if there was like a Muslim Spike Lee, this is the guy right here." But I was like, "Yeah, White." I was like White Sox. I think I like the White Sox just because like they're more fashion. Their stuff's more fashionable.
the colors, yeah.
Back in the day, in the 90s.
I'm a little conflicted now though because I on the podcast I heard Sheikh Amin showing his commitment to the Cubs, and I was like, "Oh, was it on the podcast?" Yeah. I was like, "Oh my god, I don't know if I can work at Darul Qasim anymore." But luckily I don't have that like passion for sports.
That's probably why he's making you do so much work because he knows you're a Sox fan.
No,
I'm just joking.
Sheikh Amin is
I'm messing around.
He's amazing as a mentor. He's so loose, and he makes it really, really enjoyable just to come to work. But this whole Cubs thing, it makes me like think about stuff,
You guys gotta have a talk, man. Close the doors and have a discussion.
To be honest, I was happy you had to be happy when the Cubs won the World Series because everybody was happy. It was like
it was crazy.
Yeah, it was like, man, it was as if like it was Fatah Makkah,
No, I really feel like it affected the psychology of the city.
Yeah, it did.
The city felt like a bunch of losers, and it would work its way into everything you did. Like, oh man, we lost the World Cup, the Olympics. We lost. It's because we're losers. Remember how they were pushing to get the Olympics in Chicago, and we lost it. We lost that bid, and then of course everyone just we're losers, so we don't get that.
Lovable
stuff.
losers.
Yeah,
lovable losers.
Never lovable winners.
Yeah. So the last thing before we call this podcast is. This show will probably release a little bit before Ramadan. If there's like one takeaway you can give our listeners as we go into Ramadan, what would that be?
Mashallah. I mean, Ramadan is one of the pieces of advice that our teachers would always give was just like pre-plan for Ramadan so that you give them a good amount of time. Because this is like your recharge period. So like a good piece of advice that one of the local brothers in the Masjid Mustafa community had once mentioned to me is that like 6 months beforehand, plan with work that you're going to take the last 10 days off. And even if you don't do like i'tikaf, but just like pre-plan that this is the time that like I'm not going to be involved with family even and not with work. I'm just going to be like 10 days, no phone, no laptop. I'm just going to do my ibadah. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for everyone. There was one of the mashayikh, Shaykh Zakaria rahmatullah alayhi, used to be like, he used to go into complete hiding to the point that people used to think like this. He went into like, like a medical isolation quarantine, so he would go into such quarantine that even like close associates and friends wouldn't be able to meet him. And somebody complained to him and said that, Shaykh, like Ramadan comes over all of us, but not like a flu. Like you seem like you become like sick, but he would just basically have this perspective that, well, look, Ramadan's my time, I spend the rest of the year, working with people, working with students. Ramadan is the time that I just need for myself. So like there should be a certain number of days, like 10 days of Ramadan, that everybody pre-plans that I'm going to spend this time just for myself, unplugging technology, just go to the masjid. Not even like expectation to learn anything. I mean, that's another thing. Like, well, you don't have to go to the Masjid I'tikaf program where they have like evening programs and morning programs and dars and halaqah. Just 10 days of kind of isolation, healthy ibadah. I think that's like the most useful advice that I've heard.
As far as the pre-planning is concerned, just to add on to exactly what he said, the same advice was given to me that the khushu' of the prayer is not when the prayer starts; it's the wudu, right? Which what builds up to the prayer. And I think the same thing with Rajab and Sha'ban. You have to make sure that everything's intact. That's when you got to start checking yourself. So when Ramadan hits, it's a natural progression,
Yeah, and then I think the beginning of Ramadan for, again, you sports guys out there, if you don't get distracted, because I know NHL playoffs, finals will be going on and NBA
are
finals.
they? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
I
wow.
don't think the
You
Bulls will
shouldn't
make it past the first round.
Yeah, they're not
Blackhawks
gonna-
are already in trouble, too. They shouldn't be.
That's a
but-
favor from Allah. Allah didn't allow it to happen, so you guys
Oh,
can
my
concentrate
God.
on Ramadan.
You know what Shaykh Amir
Bulls
does?
are not gonna win.
The moment he sees us getting excited about our sports teams, he'll start making dua against it.
So,
And they'll lose.
I want to give a quick shout out to Firas al-Khatib. Firas is a huge Blackhawks fan. I mean, I pull for the Blackhawks too, but they're down 2-0. Firas, maybe it'll be best if the Blackhawks just get swept first round. We don't have to worry about it this year.
Focus on your ibadah. Inshallah.
Firas will now unsubscribe to Mad Mamluks.
No, he won't. We'll call him if he
Hey,
does.
it's been a while since he has come on, so
Yeah, haven't come on. You can ask Shaykh Hamid, but I think he's coming on to do a class next year at Darul Qasim as well. And he can ask him about the postmodernism question, because I think that's what he's going to be teaching, sort of new philosophies
Mashallah.
and those type of things.
Very nice.
Mashallah. I didn't know that he was that committed of a Blackhawks fan, but mashallah.
you got to watch a Blackhawks game with him. You'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that. So with that being said, I'd like to wrap this up. Mawlana Bilal, jazakallah khair for coming on.
Barakallah feekum.
Before we let you go, how can people reach out to you? Do you have a blog, Twitter?
Oh, I used to have a number of websites I ran. I still kind of run them. I'm not that engaged anymore. Tahawi.com, ilmgate.org, I think it's org. And then my personal website, where I just people ask me to put some of my old research up. I haven't updated it in a while, but bilalaliansari.com. But if you want to contact me, on Darul Qasim's website is my official email, bilal.ali@darulqasim.org. But just as a warning, I'm not that great at responding quickly.
So the best way is to get into the doors of Darul Qasim to meet you.
Yeah, that's the best way, because as you mentioned, I do work with Khalil Center. I do work with Masjid Mustafa, Masjid Osman, and Darul Qasim. So I find it very hard to kind of respond promptly. But if it does come through like one of the official channels, it's easier for me.
Yeah.
To respond quickly. Inshallah.
All right, jazakallah khair. For our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email us at themadmamluks@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, like our Facebook page. We're on Instagram. And give us a 5-star review on iTunes. We're also on Podcast Addict for you Android folks. For our special guest, Mawlana Bilal Ansari, and my co-host, Sheikh Amir Saeed and Sim, this is Mahin signing off for the Mad Mamluks. Assalamu alaikum.